We're gonna get started here. Hey, Kathleen. Good
Hey.
to see you. I know you're running from one meeting to the next too. I'm glad you're
Yeah,
able to be here.
it's good.
I'm gonna post a question in the chat and I'd love to have a conversation around this. But just broad question, I'd love to have an open discussion about this. But what messages did you hear about money in the culture around you growing up? It could have been conscious, it could have been unspoken. But I want you to think beyond your family. These can be messages you heard at school, from church, employees, or from friends. But what did you hear about money in your culture growing up?
This is Kathy from Merced. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Kathy,
Okay.
glad you're here. Go ahead.
All right. No, I just was wondering, I don't see me on the screen. I guess I can't. I don't know. I'm new to this thing, so
You're
okay.
doing great.
Me growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived with my grandmother actually till I was like 7 years old. So it was a really big deal when my parents were able to buy a small little house in Merced. So we didn't have a lot of money, but we managed. My mom worked full time. My dad was in the Air Force. So I think that's where I learned to be thrifty.
Hmm. Did they give you a saying at all? Something you grew up saying, or you still pass on to people around you by chance?
Just try to save as much as you can because you never know when you might need it. My
Yeah.
parents were very thrifty. My grandmother too. So I had good examples.
Hmm. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Kathy. I mean, there's always these adages of like money doesn't grow on trees, right? Like that's probably something we've all heard somewhere. But I'd love to hear more. What else did y'all hear in culture around you? And Brian, I see we can't afford it as a family. Interesting. Brian, do you want to say a little bit more about that and maybe unpacking what does that mean for you in your context?
Yeah, I think, my parents, it was always like, I, we were middle class, mom was a nurse. So like we weren't like hard for money, but I don't think we was ever like flush with cash necessarily. But I do think that like, I don't know, I always think through the lens now as a parent being like, yeah, maybe we've got the money, but that's not how we're going to spend our money. Like, yes, we could do that, but like that's a choice that we're making as a family not to do that thing. And so not as like we can't like, and I don't think it's maybe necessarily bad, but I don't know. That's kind of how I think through is like as a family, like, yeah, we could go and yeah, whatever the things are, we try to be intentional that we want to direct our money where to go and say no to the things that don't fall in line with that.
No, that's really good. Well, thanks for sharing that, Brian. And I love that you invite your family into the decision-making process so that they understand the ramifications. Like if we do prioritize this, that means this, then that. So appreciate you bringing that in. Let's see. Lexi says, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Absolutely. Let's see. And then I see Jennifer says it's something that you have to work for. Jennifer, do you maybe want to unpack that for the group? What does that mean for you in your context?
So I'm in a super kind of noisy place. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine, actually.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. Because I have earphones in. Anyway, I think when I was growing up, if there was anything that I wanted or that just any kind of material possession thing or something nicer, like nicer shoes and what my parents were willing to buy for me, it was okay, but you have to work for it. And so my parents, they would supply the chores. I don't know that they necessarily had the money to pay me for them, but there would always be like the chores or the work or something, and I was able to earn whatever it was that I wanted.
That's fantastic. And some of that translates, I imagine, to your work ethic today and maybe how you see the world operating around you and how we acquire or how we choose not to acquire more, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. And I do it to my own children too. Oh, you want those $100 Nike shoes? I guess you're going to be working.
That's fantastic. Those baseboards really need to be cleaned this week. That's great. Thanks for sharing, Jennifer. You know, when I think of like myself growing up, like, son of immigrant parents, single parent household, there wasn't a lot of money to go around. So I think most of the time, if if it was free, it was for me, it was kind of this idea. And so we accessed a lot of resources around us, but something that always stuck with me was this idea of count the cost. And because you're not paying it, like someone else might. And so this holistic idea of someone's footing the bill somewhere. So what does that look like? And then on the other end, into my later teens and early adults, having mentors who helped me in acquiring financial literacy. And just for full transparency, one of the early realities for me in coming into teaching financial literacy 11 years ago was because when I came to campus at FPU, there was still the time where a bank would park a little pop-up tent and they'd give you a credit card on campus. Did you guys ever have that? It was very popular on campuses, and it's no longer allowed. But I had never had a credit card before. No one told me that if you put money on a credit card, you have to pay it back at the end of the month. And so when I was coming to buy a car for the first time in my early 20s, they're like, hey, you have a credit score of like $540. And we're like, oh, what's a credit score? Oh, well, it's, and so at some point I had to learn myself in the real world, this financial literacy. And so early in my financial literacy journey, part of what an adage that I picked up was like, you need to tell your money where to go or else it's going to go where it wants to. And this idea of, again, stewardship and facilitating your own personal finances. But Kathleen, is there anything that you would say from your upbringing, things that you heard from your culture, whether spoken or unspoken?
Well, my dad didn't believe in banks or credit. So it was like, if you can't afford to pay cash, then you can't afford it. So, I mean, I never got the credit card, and it took me, I was 18 before I saved enough to get a car, even though I got my driver's license at 16. But it taught me a lot about money, and I still feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's times when you need a credit card, but I've always paid it off at the end of the month.
Yeah.
I didn't learn the hard way, Carlos.
I definitely did. That's great. If you can't pay cash, you can't afford it, right? And I think for us in community and culture, we're going to have a lot of messages that people are bringing to the table. And so my encouragement to y'all as you're sifting through this is not telling people that they're wrong, but exposing them to unpacking what that means for them. And so, I've heard of people growing up and it's like, hey, you pull out credit for everything and never spend your own money on it, right? Other people are like, hey, I have $20,000 for a down payment on my house in the freezer, right? Like there's different, I would say, frameworks that people operate out of. And so again, we're going to hear a lot of these messages in our conversations in our groups. So really encourage you, don't shut someone down based on, it might not be what you operate from, but really facilitate and foster and help them explore what that means for them. Anybody else maybe want to share something? Last comment?
Carlos, when I was coming up, my dad passed away when I was like 12. My sister was 11. So my mom was a teacher. So my sister and I had to kind of learn quickly what money was all about. Mom used to always tell us, you have to save up for a rainy day. But when you're 12 years old, rainy day means when it rains. Not, you don't understand that. But as we got older, we understood that, things might come up, and if you don't have any money saved up, then you don't have any money to take care of whatever that situation was. So she taught us how to write checks. She taught us how to pay the bills and all of that at a very, very young age. So we had to learn about saving and budgeting, because then at that point, she was a single mom, after my dad passed away. So we had to learn early what it was about, not having extra money to do, certain things that we might have wanted to do. And she taught us and made us understand that, you just can't just spend money just because you have it. At that point in time, you have to save for, other things that might come up later.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, and I think part of that journey there is, I think you've adapted a certain way of stewarding your finances that it seems like you probably passed on to your little sister and probably whoever else in your immediate family and those around you, where again, this idea of stewardship, right? You pick it up through finances, but I imagine it also probably impacts a lot of other areas in your life beyond just money.
Oh yeah, it does. Actually, I'm raising a granddaughter right now. She's 14, but she was, like the kids today, want all those expensive shoes and all that stuff. But I got her they have this card called Green Light card, and they have chores, and so every week she has an allowance that goes on this card. And so she's learned that, well, she can't do DoorDash at school every day, because DoorDash is going to cost you $20 or $30 a day, and you don't have that. So it's teaching her, about money and how to manage her money.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing, Bernita. I love it.
Hi, Carlos.
Hey, Daisy, go ahead.
My mom she had me when she was 14. So actually my my grandparents was the ones who raised me until I was about 8 years old. And my grandmother, she was a homemaker, and my grandfather worked outside the home, but money was never discussed. And it probably was never discussed because I don't think they were educated enough to know how to discuss that. We actually, as I look back now, we were living in poverty, because we were living in a home where we didn't have a telephone nor a TV. We didn't know, so when you don't have it, you never miss it.
Yeah.
But so therefore, money was never discussed, and even when I went to live with my mom at age 8, it still was never discussed. She did what she could, to take care of me. But once I became of age and understood things a little bit better, I was able to teach her a little bit on how to start saving and doing things the way that it should be done, because back then we dealt with no banks. There was no banks, and so when my mom needed to cash a check, she went to this check cashing place. So there was never banks. So as again, I even taught her how we need to deal with banks. So these are some things, as I look back and I see, where the Lord has really, really brought me a long ways, especially sitting in a class like this, it's a long ways. And I just thank him.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Daisy. And I'm glad to hear the Lord has brought you to this place today. It's a beautiful journey. So let's maybe shift gears here, y'all, and I might just throw out a question of, do you have any questions from this week's material?
One of the things we deal with is a lot of our people that come to our classes, they don't have any money at all. So it's really difficult for them to do budgets and things like that, because they're not really spending a lot of money. Or on the other hand, if they have money, they just blow it, So we have that, the people that don't have money and people who have money but don't know how to handle it. So it's kind of hard to work with those two groups of people at the same time.
And are you doing these in cohorts, or are you doing them in individual technical assistance sessions?
We had a class in Merced called Love Plus, and one of them was financial. And so we're changing our Love Plus totally, and we're going to be, doing this program. It's going to be a lot different. So hopefully we'll have the people from the Go to Love Inc. And most of the people that came before came from the rescue mission.
Fantastic.
So, and they were kind of forced to come.
Yeah, one thing I would say is like even our other rescue mission partners, a lot of them have folks who actually don't have income in their classes. And part of what we know for contextualization is for people to start actually implementing what they're learning to their immediate lives. And so the best way they've been able to do that is to emulate scenarios for them of giving them, you know, an ethereal job and at the same time creating some income that they're managing in some way, shape, or form. And so if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to connect you to the Academy folks here at the Fresno Mission who run that program and the way they use faith and finances in their own context.
Okay. Thank you.
If you feel like that would be helpful.
Yeah, Dawn and I are going to be partners, so we're going to be working together on this.
Fantastic.
And he was working at our local rescue mission, so he's got some information that he can probably share too with us.
Fantastic. Any questions from the material? And again, this week we looked at financial education, a spiritual work, creating a plan to fast and pray, and we looked at the 2 key themes in faith and finances. Does anybody remember what those are? Oh man, there's a quiz at the end of this guy. No, there's not, but
I think one is renewal.
yeah.
Looking at how the Lord is making things new.
Exactly. So that the first one is Jesus is making all things new, including our money and relationships.
Yes.
Who's got the second one?
Using our money to accomplish God's work in the world.
Yes, God has chosen to use our money to accomplish his work.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Fantastic. No questions? We're feeling okay? So maybe let's discuss those 2 key themes then. And so I would ask you all, like, how do these complement or differ from the ways you were taught to think about money management? And again, we're looking at the 2 key themes, and I'll stick them in the chat here for y'all to review. But again, my question here is, do these 2 key themes complement or do they differ, from the ways you were taught to think about money management?
Right now, what I'm learning that back in the day I used to worry about money, but now I'm in a place where I don't have to worry about money. I seek the Lord first, in everything that I need to do, and I've learned how to give to the Lord, out of my first fruits that I make. And I believe that has been a blessing for me along the way. It's something that the Lord taught me to do. I was not taught by my family, how to pay tithes or how to give back to the community. So the Holy Spirit, that lives within me is something that helps me to focus and do what I'm supposed to do when it comes to the church and to my home, my family, as well as myself. So when I look at this about the Lord making something new, he made something new when he became my savior, and I gave my life to him. And so I started operating you know, from there, not from my own understanding, but from the understanding of his word.
So good. Thanks for sharing, Daisy. Yeah, and I'll maybe like introduce one thing that I've often heard in spaces like this, whether it's in the facilitator training or in a course where even this idea of tithing, where this 10% is God's, this other 90% is mine. Right. And when I filter it through these themes, it's like God wants to use all of that, even if it is to serve self, because I think there's a space for that, especially when we talk about these 4 key relationships, right? Our relationship with God, to ourselves, to each other, and to God's creation. And so how do we reconcile that? But I think this is where I'm headed, is like, does it match up with the way you've been taught about money management and the way you think, or does it butt heads with it potentially? I'd love to explore that for y'all.
In my case, my parents didn't go to church. They would send us to church, but then they wouldn't go. So it's different now because I do have a church I go to, and I do, you know, I know they need the money to run the church. And so I always make that a priority, that I do give them, you know, my share each month. But I wasn't taught that. I had to learn that on my own. Because my parents didn't go, and so they didn't support the churches. But since I'm involved in my church, I know that they need the money, so of course I do tithe.
Yeah.
But I had to learn that on my own.
Thanks for sharing, Kelly. Oh, this is like the pastor's favorite part, because then we start talking about tithing and giving money to the church, and pastors are like, yes, keep talking about that, right? And one thing I would say is also don't make it all about like money, right? And this ethereal 10% that we talk about in this context. I think it's much bigger and broader than simply tithing, right? It's, you know, what is God doing through me and the finances that you've been blessed with in your context? Because oftentimes we'll have people that are coming into our cohorts that actually might feel like, I don't have anything to give to God, right? So I don't understand why God would choose my financial situation, or what God can do with my financial situation. And again, this process is helping them explore that and reconcile what we would call this broken image of identity, and what God can do in and through them. And maybe then I would ask, like, as we're going through this process, what are you learning about poverty, the kingdom of God, and restored community? Are there new insights that are coming to you in this space? I'm laughing here because I was like, I see y'all thinking about this question. It's a game of chicken at this point. Who's sharing first? Oh.
When I think about people that don't have an income, they have other assets though. And I think that's where the community part comes in together. You know, having connections and having abilities, having family, you know, in different experiences. I think everyone has something to contribute, even if they don't have money. In one of the classes I was in, there was a woman who hadn't had a job. And I think I've mentioned her before. So it was halfway through the class before she got one. But what she was doing was she was babysitting, and not for pay, but she was helping her neighbors and such. And I think they were giving her food in exchange and kind of building what we would call an abundant community. And that gave her a little dignity, you know, that she didn't have an income. By the end of the class, she did, but she had hope that way, that things would get better.
And oftentimes it's instilling hope, right, in a situation that helps them move from one situation to what God has in store for them next.
Yeah. And that's something we can offer, hope.
So,
There's just one young lady that I know, and she does work, but you know, it's still kind of hard for her and her family. And I think what she did was work some overtime, and it put her $5 over, and so it caused her to lose her food stamps.
Yeah,
because of the $5 over, you know. And so she said, she said, I'm afraid of getting a raise, because once I get a raise, another raise, I'm probably going to lose my housing allowance as well. She said, and the rent is constantly going up, and I won't be able to pay that rent all by myself, you know. So what am I to do? You know, and I mean, you know, the only thing I can tell her, you know, from there is just, you know, just seek the Lord and let him guide you on what you need to do and how you need to do it. You know, so this poverty thing, and it's real.
one of the things that we've seen, especially with that financial cliff that exists in our community, as we worked with, you know, county services, is whether it's CalFresh or you know, any kind of public assistance programs, is oftentimes there's a case manager that they could be in contact with to navigate that situation, where if they're still needing those services, they won't fall off the cliff because of those $5, right? And so again, like this idea of long-term development of people, is what does that look like? How are we equipping them to navigate that space? And sometimes there are a lot of resources out there, it's just they don't know about them, right? And so for us in our stewardship, if you will, how are we making those connections? But thanks for bringing that up, Daisy, because that is a very true reality for so many people in the community, is this disincentive to work more, to earn more, because of this cliff that they potentially could fall off. That puts them in a worse situation than when they weren't working potentially. Yeah. Working as much, if you will. I will say this week you guys got to look at Eva and Isaac. Did y'all watch that video? Yeah. And so again, fictional couple, we're going to use them as our case study to connect in the Faith and Finances program. But I would ask you, like, how might we use this story in Faith and Finances classes to communicate our two key themes? How does it bring it to life?
Sorry, what's the question, Carlos?
Yeah, so we looked at Eva and Isaac's story this week in the video in the course shell. I'm wondering for us, like, how might we use this story in our courses to communicate the two key themes?
Hi, this is Faith.
Hey, Faith.
How's it going? So I think one way that I kind of thought that this could work, especially with the first point, because what were Isaac and Eve or Eva, like they kept emphasizing their family was united together as they started working towards their financial goals. And so that first part, or that first theme, is, you know, Jesus making all things new, including our money and our relationships. And it's kind of crazy that like money and your personal relationships kind of go hand in hand in this, especially in the family unit. And so I just thought it was cool that, like, you know, they each had their own financial goals that they were trying to reach and to meet. And so once they started, you know, flipping, you know, to the side of unity, trying to make sure that they're working together towards a common goal, as opposed to, you know, fighting or you know, because financial stress is a real thing, especially in marriage and the family unit. It's definitely probably one of the biggest factors for division and fighting and all that stuff. So I think it's really cool how they emphasize that like when you're able to have a common goal through your finances and whatever else it is that you're trying to do, you automatically make the family unit tighter and closer knit, I guess, if that makes sense. More of a community, like they keep saying in this course. So
Well, in other ways, you're also creating agency and decision making. You're inviting people into that process so that it's owned, right? And that the people feel like family, right? Everybody in the family feels like they're a contributing member to that, as you're saying.
yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So good. Thanks, Faith.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about Eva and Isaac's story in the Faith and Finances program? I will say, oftentimes I'm reading the story, I was like, man, I totally relate to that in this moment. And so sometimes I feel like that story is speaking to me just as much as it's speaking to the folks in our courses. So maybe last chance, any final thoughts or comments or questions about week 2's material before I transition into our week 3 review or preview, excuse me. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And let's go ahead and preview week 3. Do y'all see my screen okay?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So as we click on this, Lexi and our team made me laugh earlier because she sent me this screenshot of, I realize it's me. And so sometimes I forget I'm in this, but you'll see a couple of Fresno folks as Andrew, Larry, and I, who have been lead trainers with Chalmers for a long time, have a prayer in this, right? And so we've been fortunate enough to be able to lead this work across the country and here in Fresno for a long time. So again, the prayer this week is from me. Even though you heard me, you hear from me every week, you get to hear from me in another space. Next piece here is we're going to look at systemic facets of poverty and what that looks like for our own context. And this is sometimes a tough conversation because we're going to be exposed to, for some of us, sometimes to the conversation for the first time. For others, it may have been a lived reality. And so again, part of this process is it's introducing a foundation and a framework to operate out of, especially understanding not just our own experience, but the experience of the participants in our cohorts, and oftentimes what they're coming from and into. And so you maybe have heard me say this word, but the word shalom, we often, more than a greeting, right, think of it here in our center as restoring things to the way God intended them to be in people, for people, and between people. And we really do feel like finances is at the heart of that. And so this video is a great kickoff to the week for us to unpack that conversation. From there, we're going to look at the 5 causes of poverty. And so just FYI, you are going to be downloading this right up here, written by Geraldine Sanders, who is the head of the Faith and Finances program for the Chalmers Center. And again, you'll have a deeper read into these 5 root causes of poverty. And then you're going to look at the story of Florine, Tallulah, and Antonio, and what that looks like in their contacts, and then unpacking this through a question. Man, one of you guys is already on top of your guys' homework. Well done. So again, 5 causes of poverty. From there, we're going to do this one takes a little bit more intentionality. I would say the first two weeks have been pretty light on homework and reading and such. This week is actually a little bit more hands-on, where we're going to have you fill out a financial family tree, excuse me. So again, another download that we're going to look at. But we're going to look at, here's you, and if potentially you have a partner. And then we're going to ask you to then go back a generation and talk to, if your parents are still around, or if you know about your parents, and really understand their own financial situation down to your children. And you have a series of questions where you would ask, you know, parent, mentor, or guardian, what were Christmases and birthdays growing up? Right. And like for me growing up, birthdays, we didn't have any presents, but there was plenty, because I have 26 aunts and uncles, just throwing that out there. So I have an endless army of cousins. And so every other weekend, it felt like there was a birthday party. My house was always the party house. There was the generic, like, couple, you know, drunk uncles, and the mom's group on this side. Like, my context was very simple, in the sense of it was just a lot of hanging out and a lot of eating and a lot of community all the time. And questions down to financial decisions made in adulthood, a few greatest accomplishments. And so again, we're going through this for parents, mentors, guardians, and then we're doing this about yourself and your potential spouse or partner. And again, further questions down the road. But I really do encourage you to set aside probably an hour, maybe 2, to work through this intentionally, as well as talking to other people. But that's the financial family tree. From there, we're going to look at savings goals. There's a little interactive map as you click on stuff. Right. Oop, didn't want to write something there yet, but this will be for y'all to interact with, as which of these have you saved toward, and all the way down to this interactive activity. Just know that for this one, if you're on your computer, it should download correctly. I've seen this, if you're doing on a tablet, it might be hard to navigate. And so just know that you might need to float your finger on your tablet or your phone to find these little arrows and how they pop up. And you might be able to swipe, but just know that I know that the interface sometimes is not as friendly on certain tablets. But you'll see that you're going to be clicking through some slides essentially on 4 key reasons people save. And you'll see emergencies, life cycle needs, investment opportunities, and then consumption smoothing. And then, as always, we have a prayer section with a couple key prayer points. You'll have from Soong-Chan Rah's Prophetic Lament, which is a book that I haven't read necessarily, but Soong-Chan has been in Fresno multiple times over the past years. He came to a city summit one year, which was a conference that used to exist here in Fresno, and did a whole weekend on this idea of prophetic lament. But again, you have that activity here as a prayer section. And as always, you have a dive deeper section, a couple articles, and I think this is a TED Talk, or, oh no, it's a Q Ideas section. Q Ideas is like the alternative to TED, if y'all know about Q. But just again, something for you to listen to. Reminder that the dive deeper section is not required, but is just an additional for y'all to learn more about that topic this week. And as always, you have the Zoom link in the following bubble. But let me go ahead and stop sharing here. And I will ask, are there any questions about this week's homework or any of the content that's coming up here?
Yeah, hello. My name is Gabriel.
Hey, Gabriel.
I wanted to know, since I was, I guess, late for the faith and finance class, I haven't been able to enter my account, I guess. And
Let's
so I want to see if I'm in the system pretty much.
let's see. I'm gonna share my screen.
Okay.
Are you, I have a couple people that still haven't necessarily clicked, but are you gas6.fpu@gmail.com?
No, I'm Jovel Gabriel, 300.
Let's see.
He's part of Selma Com.
Yeah, I'm with Delfina.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't look like, okay, so then we'll need to get your email from you, Gabriel.
Okay.
I have it, Carlos. He's actually on our list.
Interesting.
So I'm not sure why he doesn't show up there.
Do I supposed to do something on my end that I haven't done yet, or?
You should receive a link from the Pathright platform to log in.
Okay. Let me check my email because
Thanks
I
for
haven't.
bringing that up, because this is the chance
Yeah,
to
anytime, because I'm like, yeah, week 3. I'm like, whoa.
yeah. Let's see.
How do you spell the path link?
I just put it in the chat for you.
Oh, awesome.
So I just added you into the system from the back end. I hope this comes up. Okay. But we'll connect with you offline, Gabriel, to make sure you get what you need to get going.
Gabriel, I tried to call you this weekend since you hadn't logged on, but your number, the number we have for you, wasn't in service.
If you can, Gabriel, can you maybe send a message to Kathleen or myself privately with the best contact number for you? And we'll navigate getting you logged into the system here. All right, any other questions? Okay.
Carlos, on this financial family tree, is this something that we share with the class, or is that a personal?
No, that's a personal activity. So you don't actually have to share that with us. That's more of an activity that you do individually. And then there is a section here from one where then you would start to talk about your own financial histories where, let me see where it is here. Here it is. Where again, you don't have to send this in to us, but really the encouragement is like, is there someone on your team that you can talk about this with? So if you're coming on your own, you don't necessarily have someone on your team, but we would encourage you to take some time to share this with somebody in your ecosystem, maybe your faith and finances ecosystem, that could help you process what you learned and some of the new insights that you learned. But again, this is more of a personal reflection activity.
Okay, when you say share that with your team, are you talking about the, because in my church, there's 2 other facilitators. Are you talking about them?
Yeah.
The allies, as you call them allies, something like that.
Yeah. So then,
trying to learn the
are you with
language.
Deb? Is that where you're at?
Deborah?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, I might pick up the phone and call her and just process some of what you learned, and she'll know which activity we're
Yeah,
talking
we did
about
that
here.
last week, a little bit.
That's great.
Yeah, so, okay. Thank you.
Of course. But again, reminder that this isn't something that you're sending to me necessarily, but this is more of an inflective assignment for y'all to work through. So I would maybe I'll leave one final question in the chat here. Like, I think my big question for y'all is like, what is one thing that we discussed this week that you would like to learn more about? Or is there another topic that you're like, hey, I want to know a little bit more about this? But again, what is one thing we discussed this week that you would like to learn more about? I would say drop a comment in the chat, and that way I can collect them and we can use that to bring additional resources for next week as well, as we're curating what our next check-in looks like. The other thing that you're going to be hearing from our team, whether it's call, text, or email, or all three, is we're going to be confirming y'all's mailing addresses. Because it's thankfully, thanks to the Lilly Endowment funding, your materials for those of you guys located in the Central Valley are covered by the Lilly Endowment's funds. And so you will be getting your own facilitator manual and one copy of a participant guide. So again, we'll be making sure that we have your correct mailing address to get that to you. But if there are no comments or questions, Kathleen, would you mind closing us in a word of prayer?
Sure. No, I don't mind. Lord, thank you that you are making all things new. Father, and you've given each of us hope in our own journeys of financial freedom and wisdom. And Lord, thank you for all the hearts here who want to learn more ways to share it in our own networks. And Father, be with each person here on their journey as they go through and watch the videos and answer the questions and truly ponder the questions on that are proposed to help us be able to go deeper, to be able to meet people where they are. Lord, as we know, poverty is complicated and people have different situations, different experiences, different needs. And Lord, thank you that you care. And thank you for this curriculum that we can use and for Eva and Isaac's story, Lord, that we can engage with in learning for our own transformation, but passing it on as well. So thank you for this time together. And I just pray a blessing on each person as they carve out the time to do these exercises in the midst of their busy schedules. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you, everyone. I'm really enjoying the comments and the communication on the Pathright platform, so keep it up. And again, Kathleen and I are here to answer any questions or be a sounding board for what you're processing this week, especially as we get into the meat of the content of this curriculum. But we'll see you all next Tuesday. Have a wonderful week, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
God bless.
See you.